Today, we are talking to Dr. Davena Longshore with the Cummings Foundation for Behavioral Health. This conversation went so well that we could not stop it, and so we're splitting it into two episodes. Here is part one. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Healthy, Happy, Wise, Wealthy. I have with us today Dr. Davena Longshore from the Cummings Foundation for Behavioral Health. And welcome, Dr. Longshore. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So before we even begin and dive in, I want to read your bio because you have such an impressive bio. And then we're going to jump into what the Cummings Foundation is, what your work is there. And we're recording on Juneteenth. So, and this is, I know everyone doesn't get to listen on this day, but it's a great day to do this. And I'm so excited to do this with you today. So thank you for doing it today, even though you were in the middle of moving and all this stuff. So
yes. But it's always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, here's her bio. It's very impressive. Dr. Davena Longshore is the Executive Director of Research, Operations, and Development at the Cummings Foundation for Behavioral Health with a PhD in clinical psychology and a specialization in military, police, and criminal psychology. Dr. Longshore brings a unique and deeply informed perspective to law enforcement wellness. She also holds a master's degree in both psychology and computer information systems and is currently completing her third master's degree in clinical psychopharmacology. This week, she's finishing that. Yes. Her current research focuses on the efficacy of wellness programs in policing, an area where she is helping to shape evidence-based strategies that support officer mental health resilience and long-term well-being. She has over 20 years experience spanning leadership counseling and crisis response, including work as a critical incident responder in a level 4 double max security facility and as a court-appointed competency examiner. Dr. Longshore's clinical expertise includes trauma-informed care, neuropsychological assessment, and treatment of high-stress populations. She is a member of the American Psychological Association, the American Academy of Clinical Psychology, and the Society for Criminal and Police Psychology. Her work bridges research and practice, offering law enforcement agency practical, data-driven solutions to support the mental health of those who serve. And here she is. Oh my gosh. Thank God you got that fourth degree, right?
Right. I keep telling people, don't let me do it again. Like, if I think about it, just say, no, did you eat today? Are you hungry? Maybe you should eat and you'll forget about getting another degree. So
yeah, no, it's so incredibly impressive. And we see some of it behind you there on the wall too. So let's start out. Tell us a little bit about the Cummings Foundation for Behavioral Health, because I think that's probably something most people don't know about.
Right. So the Cummings Foundation for Behavioral Health was founded by a clinical psychologist named Dr. Nicholas Cummings. And for anyone who went to school for psychology and read a lot of psychological history, his name is everywhere. He informed a lot of your sitting presidents. He did psychological research that helped with the World War II. I mean, he's published and written over 300 books and articles. He is the maker of the managed care model. And that's kind of how the Cummings Foundation came about in making the managed care model, which was kind of like your first model for integrated care. Yeah. He was paid a lot of money, and he took that money and put it to the side for the Cummings Foundation. And so luckily for me, when I was solicited for the position, the family was kind of in a place where they had this foundation. This money was specifically for this foundation to impact the community, and they were trying to figure out exactly what to do with it. So his wife, who passed about a year and 6 months ago, Dr. Dorothy Cummings, she was a clinical social worker. She saw some years ago everything going on with George Floyd and the police and the Black community, and just the community at large, beginning to clash a lot with law enforcement policies. And she said, I want to help. I don't know how, but I want to help to kind of reduce this. And that's where the birth of our law enforcement project came from.
That's amazing. And they have both passed at this point, but somewhat recently. Is that
Yes.
correct? Yes.
Yes. The Dr. Dorothy Cummings, she passed about a year and 6 months ago. And Dr. Nicholas Cummings passed about 6 years ago.
Okay. So pretty recently, yes. And how long have you been with them?
2 years. So
Okay.
I was hired just to do research for this particular project. And within a year, I was promoted to run the organization.
Yeah, you were. Oh, and I've gotten to know you some obviously before today, and know what a dear soul you are, and how impactful you are, and will continue to be in this position.
Oh,
So,
thank you.
and so, in addition to your ability to research and everything you know from your academic world, you also have that experience in the Supermax prison, not Supermax, level 4 max. Am I saying it right?
Level 4 double max.
Level 4 double max. It sounds fun until we learn the reality of it, right? I mean, it sounds like a
Yeah.
holiday, but just know the opposite. I'm being silly, obviously.
Yes, the complete opposite. I mean, if you let my kids tell it, it was a nightmare for them
Yeah,
having to deal with me while I was working in that type of environment, because you are working with your offenders with your more violent and most violent convictions. And so, in that type of environment, being a female, being a Black female, which caused me to have a lot of issues because most of the inmates are Black and brown, and them not really experiencing a Black doctor, and the officers there not really experiencing a Black doctor, not knowing what the interaction is going to be like. There were a lot of issues, definitely a lot of issues, a
interesting.
lot of gangs, your major gangs, your white supremacist gangs, um, some of your worst Mexican gangs in California. Of course, the Bloods, the Crips, which actually some of those yards were actually your nicer, calmer yards. People don't understand that even in prison, there's a culture and a
Mhm.
code. And believe it or not, some of your more organized gangs are pretty decent. They have a code like you can't hurt female administrative staff. Those are pretty quiet yards, actually, where there's not a lot of violence, not a lot of riots.
That's good.
Yes. But, in the position I ended up being in, so first, when I came in, they knew that one of my specialties was personality disorders, which you see a lot of within institutions like correctional facilities. So I
Mhm.
was placed on a yard, and most of my caseload was individuals with personalities disorders. And then after seeing my skill, I was asked by the chief of mental health to take on the position as the critical incident responder. And in that position, it was my job to respond to inmates when they were psychotic, when they were suicidal, when they were homicidal. I also was responsible for evaluating inmates after overdoses if they survived. So it was a pretty intense job, and I was working there, and then I ended up getting recruited to work part-time at another prison because they were lacking the staff. So I was working at two different prisons.
So, how long were you in doing that work with the prison in California, in the two
Oh,
prisons?
it was only for a year and 6 months. I I am too empathetic for that type of system. I am too much of the type of person who wants to get to the root of a problem and fix it,
Yeah.
not just put a band-aid over it. And unfortunately, our correctional system is not meant to rehabilitate. It's not, It's not meant to truly help in that type of way. It is designed to keep offenders in there.
Yeah.
And so it's not designed for people to get healed. It's not designed for them to do better. And I just got tired of fighting that type of system because I'm completely opposite of it. I was trying to help people get better, and those who could parole, I was trying to help them parole. And
Yeah.
I never lost a victim to suicide because not only did I respond to the incident, but I maintained contact. Whatever the resource was that they needed to help fix whatever problem they had, I was making sure they had the resource. Whatever complaint they had, sometimes it was complaints. I was negotiating with the lieutenants and the sergeants and the captains to get resources for them and to get those needs met. And I was doing that, I was fighting against the system, and it was just beating me down.
Yeah. Because you are very solutions driven, and just having any kind of empathy in that situation, I think would be, it's needed, but how challenging is that? Yeah.
Right. I mean, it contributed to my success in that position because they would just tell me what they needed. They didn't feel like they needed to lie. They didn't feel like they needed to manipulate me. They would just tell me what was going on because they felt like I actually cared and I actually wanted to help them. And so there were times when there were inmates who were suicidal, and it kind of went under the radar as maybe just a drug overdose that was attributed to them using drugs recreationally, or some type of medical sickness. And the inmates themselves would say to these people, their cellmates would say, "Hey, you should go see Dr. Longshore. She could help you." So that was also reducing our suicide rate, because everybody was like, this is the woman that if you need help, she's going to find a way to help you. And I enjoyed that part of it, but it was like a rat race and running around in a circle, because I would do something and then it would get undone by the system.
Mm. And I know you said you've had some traumatic experiences from that in your current position probably help you understand what the traumatic experiences police officers have.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So many. I'm trying. I'm trying to think of
one that's shareable, and we don't have
right.
to share any of them if you don't feel comfortable. But I know.
I mean, I think I'll just give one that's maybe an example of, and some context around it. That's maybe an example of how I can relate to police officers. So that type of position, it's level 4 double max. State of California makes you sign something that says we won't negotiate for your life if you're held hostage. We get training and videos on how people set you up and threaten your family. And there were days when I would get alerts like, hey, you're just leaving work. You need to take your badge off because this gang is looking for people from our prison. And if they find you, they're going to kill you. So there was always that aspect of my family and I could be in danger. When I first took the job, they told me you need to move. So I had to move to some place outside of the city, gated community. I was living close to the sheriff, because they said you can't live around their family members. And right now you're currently living close to family members of people that you're going to be treating and who are in prison. My kids had to discontinue social media use because there was always the fear that if I made someone upset while I was at work, they would contact their gang. Or, I mean, some of my patients included hitmen for the mob. So there was always the fear that if you make them upset, they'll go after your family. Wow. Inside, there was a fear of you could get stabbed. There have been times I've been on yards and I'm walking around these yards. I'm not being escorted, by anyone. It's just me. And the inmates are just around me. And I'm walking through a yard trying to get through a gate, waiting for the person up in the tower to see it, to let me through. An inmate says to me, "You were supposed to come see me for therapy. What happened to you?" Then another inmate says, "Why aren't you my therapist?" And then they just all of a sudden, everyone's yelling at me and they're all getting closer and surrounding me. And I hear them from the tower yell, "Run." And they slide the gate open slightly so that I can run away from these angry inmates that are angry with me for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So there was always the fear of, when I walk through this gate, which once you walk through, some of the similarities to an inmate are you can't take your cell phone. There's no contact with the outside world. There's no YouTube, it's blocked. There's no Gmail, it's blocked. So there's absolutely no contact with the world. And so there's always the fear that once I walk through there, I may not walk out.
Yeah. Wow. I have to say wow a little bit. That's intense. That's intense for sure. And I'm kind of thankful you're not doing it anymore.
So are my kids, because
Yeah.
it puts you in a state of high alert all the time, which is what officers are in. You're
Yeah.
always looking on over your shoulder. You're always expecting someone to do something wrong, because I'm treating the person that you just saw on the news shot up the bus. These are the people that I'm treating. And so now all this negative stuff has become my reality. And I start to see the world that way. Like, people are evil and you have to protect yourself. So you get kind of this chip on your shoulder. You're always looking over it. You're distrustful of everyone. You have a difficult time now attaching to people because you don't trust anybody. Also, too, because now what you learn to make of humor in that type of environment, the average person is like, "It's not funny." Like it's dark or it's morbid or it's weird. So then now there's the isolation, right? Where you're isolated from people because they don't understand what you're going through, and your conversation is different from theirs because of the things that you see every day. So then that isolation further impacts your view of people.
Right.
Yeah, it makes you think even worse of people. So it changes your personality. It changes the way you see the world. It changes your personality. My kids would tell me, "Man, you were on edge all the time. We couldn't drop something without you going for a weapon, thinking that you had to defend yourself against someone." So it's a very intense experience. And even though I'm out of it, it changes you neurologically. Like, you just don't see the world the same way as other people do. Like, my partner is happy-go-lucky, running through the grass with the daisies, while I'm like, "Is there a gun?" Like, "Do you see that building? Did you look on the building and make sure no one's trying to shoot at you while you're running through the grass?"
Yeah.
And, unfortunately, it's very similar to law enforcement, who can go to a routine traffic stop and lose their lives.
Yeah. And so how does that impact your work? Because I know you've said some things about, officers. And for example, what you're talking about, you can't have a traumatic experience like that and go home and tell your spouse or, or your friends, or like how, and then it's just maybe dark humor between, other police officers if you feel camaraderie with them, or,
Right.
how do they cope?
Unfortunately, what we've seen in that population is depression, high rates of depression, high rates of anxiety, high rates of substance use, and definitely high rates of PTSD. And the feeling like how do I cope with this? Especially because majority of law enforcement is male. So, you have our societal issues when it comes to patriarchy and men and the roles and behaviors that society has told them are masculine that they try to meet every day. And then you put on top of that, you're a law enforcement officer. So the feeling is, I don't really have an outlet. Who do I talk to? What do? I really don't have an outlet. And how sometimes that comes out in men in general, not just in law enforcement, is through anger.
Yeah. And then anger can be what we see and what we can be afraid of,
Yep.
Because that is scary. Anger can be scary.
Yes.
So there's a track there that I know with the programs that you're developing, you want to kind of meet that area in there that's not being met. And you have said that there's sometimes resistance to this, right? When you go
Yes.
to these forces.
Yes. So, America doesn't have the greatest the greatest track record as far as law enforcement and the Black community. And I don't even want to say many people know, because I've learned more as I've traveled and lived in different states that a lot of Americans don't know history. They don't know a lot about what has transpired, the roots of many things, the roots of some of the systems that exist in the US. I was fortunate enough to be raised by a father who was a cotton picker, who marched with MLK, who helped integrate schools in South Carolina. He was an educator, he was a civil rights activist. And so he made sure I understood history, because if you don't understand where things are coming from, you won't understand why they are the way they are in the present. And so, we know in the South that law enforcement was originally slave catchers. And the Black community just doesn't have the best view of law enforcement. And unfortunately, it runs deep on the opposite end. And so I've had situations where we've reached out to law enforcement agencies. My chief of staff, who's a white male, normally does it for me. They're all on board, and then they meet me and see I'm a Black female, and they back out.
And that, I have heard you said that before, and it is shocking in a way. It's shocking to me, not that I don't think racism is real, but what you're offering is because the Cummings Foundation offers money to
Right.
help. Like, you're giving money. Would you like this check for these programs?
Right.
Can we implement these programs at no cost to you?
Right.
So that's it's telling. It's like, this is Juneteenth, and it's telling, right? That there's still ways to go. There's still issues.
Yes.
And honestly, I feel like you are the woman to address so many of these things, and I'm so honored to have you on the podcast for that reason.
I mean, I feel like I see the problem from both worlds,
Right.
because I had pushback from the Black community, like, what? You're working with the police? What is wrong with you? And, oh, so you're going to blame everything they do on mental health issues and negate the fact that they're racist. And so, I've had negative feedback even from the opposite end. But for me, working in corrections, working in the jail before that, and becoming colleagues with these people, going through the same things that they go through and seeing how it impacted me, I begin to understand that our problem is way more complex than someone doesn't like somebody who doesn't look like them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Maybe you could talk a little bit more than that. Like, I know you've told me some things about just like you're in a situation, it's a heated, you have to make a decision very quickly, and a bias might come in at that point,
Mm-hmm.
and that might be where that happens.
Yes. So humans think in something we call in the psychological world as schemas. And I'm going to try not to be too technical
You're a little
for
technical.
everyone. But we think in something called schemas. It allows us to think quickly under duress. And it's evolutionary. It existed back when we were hunters and gatherers and out in the wild, where you had to think quickly. And if something or someone did not look like you had to fight or run. Unfortunately, the human mind has not evolved much past that. And we still operate in a capacity where you have to make your mind put in the energy load to think logically. If you do not, it will think in patterns, it will think according to what is the quickest way that I can make a decision about the situation. And that's where biases come in, which we all have.
Yeah.
I have a bias against snakes. I don't care what snake it is. If I see it, I am running for my life.
Yeah.
But I've lived places, I grew up in South Carolina. You know, we had rattlesnakes, copperheads. You run from those.
Right.
But then I moved to Georgia and I saw things like black snakes, which actually eat other snakes. You want them in your yard. They're not poisonous and they'll eat other snakes. But I still saw this snake and was like, absolutely not. Like, I don't care what kind of snake you are. I'm running because you're a snake. I do that to preserve my life.
Right.
And, and so humans, we tend to think in a way that if we don't understand something, if something is different from us, we will automatically reject that thing. We will run from it or fight it out of the need to preserve ourselves. It's not logical, it's an evolutionary behavior. To
Yeah.
stop it, you have to think logically. You have to step in and now start doing some decision making, some weeding out of, is this really dangerous for me? Is this really a bad thing? What evidence do I have that this thing is actually bad for me? But most people, unfortunately, research shows most of us as humans don't do that regularly. And definitely in a situation where your life is in danger, you don't have the energy or mental capacity to do it. Your brain is sending all the blood into your body for you to run or fight. And so you're going to start operating unknowingly off of your biases.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have a proprietary program that you're going to be writing and publishing later this year. So you can't say a lot about it, but I know that's a piece of it is, let's and but everyone can. Let's talk in if you don't mind talking in general terms about that. Like, not just, a police force, but all of humanity needs
Mm-hmm.
to look at like how you describe this the schema, the training we've gotten, or just our knee-jerk reaction is maybe a phrase I would use. And here's a situation, here's how I'm going to respond to it.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a person, this is what I know to be true about this person.
Mm-hmm.
Here's an event, this is what I know to be true about this event. There's a mindset I know to be for or against this mindset. And in I mean, not that I talk about politics on here, but of course politics has been very heated. So, we're all very for against different things, and that can get in, and that kind of, it's draining, right? It's very,
Yeah.
very draining. So for just anyone listening, do you have any ideas on, what can we do when we're thinking of, we encounter a bias and maybe we're not even thinking about it, but we're just like, that's bad. Um,
So, something very simple you can do is Harvard did an implicit bias um, research study. And so they have several assessments. They're free. You can go to just Google Harvard implicit bias, and the website will come up. And they have every single common bias that you can think of, even from the standpoint of um, do you associate women with staying in the home and taking care of kids and men with work?
yeah,
Or do you like science more than reading? Like every bias that you can think of, they have it. And you can take these tests and they'll tell you whether or not you have certain biases and what they're for. Another thing that research says, the biggest thing research says that helps you to get rid of negative biases is to entrench yourself in that group that you have the negative bias against. And so for me, I said, I'm going to work with law enforcement because I am deathly afraid of them. I grew up afraid of them. We did not view in our community, we did not view the police as helpers. We viewed them as terrorizers and people who put us in prison for no reason. So I was deathly afraid of them. And that was my bias because now working with them, that's not always true.
Right.
But I entrenched myself in the community. One of the agencies we support, they do something called community policing, but they do it the right way. So what they do is they assign an officer to a community, but the assignment is not just to protect the community, it is to get to know the community. They are to have lunch with them and talk with them. They're taking the elderly in their community, their medications from the pharmacist. They're raising money for kids who don't have food in their neighborhood. And it significantly reduced the crime. It significantly reduced, officer violence among the community. And one of the times when I was visiting there was the most amazing thing for me to see because this department is majority white, but these neighborhoods are majority Black. And I was at the station. It just happened to snow, which is not normal for that area of South Carolina. And you had Black kids calling the station saying, I want my officer to come play with me. And they answer and they said, hey, this officer, they're off today. Can we send someone else to play with you? And they're like, oh, we like our officer, but okay, you can send them. And these are Black kids with white officers that they're asking, will you come play with me? And the officers go play with them.
Yeah.
But these stories you don't see on social media. You don't see on the news. You see violence, one against the other. You see division, but you don't see the agencies like this who care. This agency also makes their officers continually go through simulations. They didn't have a lot of money, which is why we're supporting them. The little money and grant money they got, they spent it on this simulation because they're so expensive. They got one of the cheapest ones, which is around $100,000.
Okay.
But they got it because what they do is they take officers over and over and over again through real life situations. And bodily harm is the last thing they teach for them to use. And in these simulations, when they use it, they're required to explain, why did you do that instead of de-escalating, instead of doing this? This department also has a clinical social worker on staff. When they get a mental health call, that social worker is in the car with them. They do not respond without some type of mental health technician. But also they know their community. So if they get a call that Bob is walking naked down the road, they're answering the call like, oh no, it's because Bob has schizophrenia and sometimes Bob forgets their medication. Let me go call their doctor and get the doctor there and help Bob, not let me go arrest Bob. When I went there, they were commending an officer because 2 officers responded to a situation where a person was drunk. There was not even an attempt to arrest. They got his car to a safe place and they got him home to his wife because they knew him. They know the community. They talk to them. They know what they're going through and they're now human to them. They're not separate. They're not this person that looks different from me and I don't understand. They're a human being just like them. They found a common ground. But like I said, these are not the stories that make the news.
No. Right. I won't even say that, but yeah, there is a clickbait factor, and sometimes the nice stories are on social media, but they usually are not on world news or anything like that. Yeah. Is this the same community that you guys built the gym for?
It is.
Okay.
It is. They have a female chief, and she is amazing. And she just wants what's best for the community and best for her officers. And the little funds that they could acquire, they spent on the simulation so that they could teach their officers how to regulate themselves better in high stress situations, how to de escalate instead of responding in violence. And I mean, I was just so impressed by how I saw them interact with the community, the care that they had, that I said we have to help you. And so we did. We wanted to do physical training, which is one of the programs that we offer. They didn't have a gym. We built them a gym.
Free of charge.
Yes. Built it, bought all the equipment, and sent in the physical trainers to train their officers.
Yeah. I want to just put in a short call to action, because if you'd like to see programs in your area, in your precinct, with your police officers, you can email you about that. And also, if you want to donate towards this, because this is a thing that brings a lot of healing and health and safety to the community and to the country, you can also donate also, which is Cumming, Cumming, and S on the end of it, and then CFBH.org, Cummings Foundation for Behavioral Health.org. And that is part one with Dr. Davena Longshore with the Cummings Foundation for Behavioral Health. Stay tuned next week where we continue this amazing conversation.